Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Get outside more in the fall. Mm-hmm. Welcome, everyone, for all that are joining us. Happy Monday. We're trying to get in the season here in the spirit. So what is your favorite thing about fall? That's our question of the day. Feel free to put it in the chat. Does anyone want to unmute? Shannon, we hear you with cooler weather, more time with the dogs, crunching leaves, sweaters. Ooh, Kathy, 27 degrees Celsius, feels like 33. Ooh, not fall at all. On it, Allison, Libra season. Yeah, Jose, love that. Karen, where are there hot air balloon festivals? If you can unmute. Interested in that. Oh, Boise and Reno, got it. I love it. Does anyone have any decorations up for fall yet, or Halloween coming up? Charlotte, you have a cemetery? Tell us about this.
So it's very much my partner's thing. She makes, we made a bunch of like little tombstones and they're all Jack themed. So we have like a tomb for Jack Skellington, and Jack Daniels has a tombstone. So she's adding new ones this year. So yeah, we love Halloween.
Oh, I love that. That's so great. I need to up my decoration game. I have sadly none, and I need to fix that. Yay. Thanks everyone for putting that in the chat. Like feeling a little cooler already. Fall weather. Oh, and pumpkins. Yes. Anyway, I'm getting ideas. Okay, good. Did I see everyone always talks about pumpkin spice everything, so I'm glad pumpkins are making an appearance. So welcome everyone. Thanks for being here. We have a great presentation today that we're going to get to, and if you're new to the call, definitely put your name in the chat. We want to see where you're coming from if this is your first time. And just a reminder, we will not have a call next Monday in observance of Indigenous Peoples Day. So our next call after that is going to be the 16th. So this is going to be a great call to send you off for the next couple of weeks. And we're just so happy everyone's here celebrating Monday with us. So as we kick off our call, we're going to start with some national updates. So would anyone like to unmute and start with national updates?
Hey everybody, Kathy from Canada here. Just a reminder that up until tomorrow, you can register for the early bird discount for our virtual Violence Link conference coming up on November 8 and 9. So I'll pop the information into the chat for you. Hope to see you there.
Would anyone else like to share?
Yeah, Allison here, speaking for Dr. Sheila Sagerson and Kelly Dewar from Maddie's Fund. We have our Maddie's Insights webcast coming up on October 12th, Thursday. So there's a registration link I put in the chat. And this is a really interesting study on examining relationships between BIPOC and their companion animals. And Dr. Kasavia Atata is a really wonderful speaker. So I highly recommend you join us on that webcast. So again, the registration link is in the chat. See you there.
Thanks, Allison. Also wanted to point out Robin's message in the chat about Journey You Own, the second session, deep dive meeting series. And so is going to be the date for that, Wednesday, October 4th of this week. Definitely join that if you can. Some really great sessions, meditation sessions. Wonderful. Any other national updates? I know I see a lot in the chat. Feel free to unmute if you want to present your national update.
All right, well, if there are no more national updates, I'm very excited to introduce our speaker today to discuss, can our pets tell us what they are thinking? And this is from Dr. Federico Rossano, founder and director at Comparative Cognition Lab at UC San Diego. And Dr. Rossano, I will pass it over to you.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this event. Maddie's Fund has been doing fantastic work in support of dogs and pets in general, and I'm just delighted to have a chance to tell a little bit more about what we're doing to all of you and see if anybody is interested in maybe collaborating or helping us along the way. So let me see if I can start sharing the screen. Can you see it?
Yes, we can. Perfect.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm Federico Rossano. I'm the director of the Comparative Cognition Lab. Great news that I just got recently. We are going to open a dedicated pet cognition lab at UC San Diego. So it's going to be the first pet cognition lab in California. So very excited about this. If you are in the neighborhood, please stop by. We only do, of course, behavioral studies, and we're very much interested in communication and social cognition and how animals process information and so on. So what I want to tell you about, though, is work that we've been doing in the last few years, in particular in relation to the development of sort of a new tool that different people have been using to kind of interact with humans, in particular the use of buttons. Before I get to this, though, I hope it's okay if I share with you a little story that kind of will shape a little bit the trajectory. In 1798, a stuffed specimen of a platypus is sent to the British Museum, and it's considered a hoax. The reason being that once they receive it, they look at it and they see that it has fur, but it also has a beak, and it appears to be laying eggs. And the scientists of that time just can't figure out what this is. It doesn't quite fit the categories of what they knew. So is it a mammal? Is it a bird? It appears to also be poisonous. So what is this? The naturalist show that receives it, after spending some time trying to see if there was evidence that different body parts of different animals have been sewn together, realizes that that's not the case, that this seems to be indeed one animal, and so says, well, look, we can't quite figure out what this is, but we can describe what we see. This is 1798. It only took 86 years for scientists to kind of agree on what this thing was. And it took one scientist in particular going to Australia, which at that time was not super hospitable, and spend 1 year in the wilderness actually studying a platypus in the wild to decide that maybe we should come up with a new category. And the category is monotreme, so a mammal that lays eggs. The reason I'm telling you this is because I think of this project very much as my own platypus, the kind of thing that when I first saw it, I was quite uncertain about what this was, and tried to approach it the same way, which was all I can do is try to describe what I see, collect as much data as possible, present it to the scientific community, and hopefully see what we can make of this and see if maybe there's something worth reconsidering what we know about pets. So who am I? Just one slide in case, because probably most of you have no idea. So as I said, I'm a professor in cognitive science. My lab is called Comparative Cognition Lab because what we do is we study cognition in humans across the lifespan. We study children, younger adults, older adults. We collect data across cultures. We collect data in Kenya, in India, in Mexico, different countries in Europe, in Japan, and we collect data across species. So most of my work in the past has been on non-human primates. I'm actually on my way to Kenya. I have a field site. I'm co-director of a field site of wild baboons. So we actually follow baboons in the wild and study their behavior. And so I'm also very much interested in sort of animal cognition and how it shows evidence of intelligence. We're interested in communication in particular, but also social cognition in general. And obviously we're interested in how sort of these different skills have evolved and how domestication might have played a role in sort of selecting for some of these abilities. Apologies, I promise there's going to be a lot of video clips, so I'm going to try to keep it low on technical terms, but hopefully you can ask me questions at the end if you have any doubt. So last thing about me, just because a lot of people were like, why would you be doing this study? I have a bit of a weird background. So I studied communication studies as an undergraduate in Italy, sociology and anthropology, later on at UCLA. I did my PhD in linguistics. My postdoc was in developmental and comparative psychology, and now I'm a professor in cognitive science. So when you look at this, you see on one end, somebody who's not very structured. On the other end, that, you know, having spent some time in different social sciences, you kind of learn a thing or two about different tools you could use to potentially tackle problems. And I think in many ways, this probably has led me to be particularly interested in this question. The other thing that not many people actually know is that I grew up watching this cartoon. It's called Pimpa, it's an Italian one. It's a dog with red dots. I was not at all fazed by the fact that the dog was speaking and singing. On the other hand, I was shocked by the fact that it had red dots that didn't make any sense. And so again, it's kind of interesting why we sort of find some things reasonable and others not. But it is important because one of the things that people ask me sometimes is like, why do we care? And I want to say right away, we care because if you're like me, and if you have children or grandchildren or whatever, you might have noticed that the majority of books and cartoons and animated movies we watch are about animals speaking. It is part of sort of our childhood, the belief that animals have things that they want to share with us and that somehow communicating is possible, that they have things that they want to share. And so to me, understanding if there's a way of understanding better what they're thinking and how they can communicate this with us is basically trying to tackle a childhood dream that I hope many of you share with me. So how did I end up starting this project? And I'll tell you more about the project in a second. Well, many of you might have heard in 2019 about the a speech pathologist called Christina Hunger that had started training a dog, Stella, to use buttons the way that she was training nonverbal children to actually communicate through the same buttons. She was basically adopting something she had been using in a practice now with her own pet. This went viral, CNN covered it, a bunch of other media covered it. And so my colleagues reached out to me and said, hey, should we do a study on this? But the problem was that this was one dog, and there was a long history on animal language studies, highly problematic, especially with great apes. And I basically sent them 4 papers explaining why we shouldn't be doing this. Fast forward a few months, now I have my first child, and I'm a happy dad. I have 2 by now. And so I have my first child. I'm very excited to see how my baby is learning to communicate. And then the pandemic hits. And so I am still non-tenured, which for those of you who are not in academia, basically is like my job is not permanent. And so I still need to do my best to kind of get to that status. And I can't collect data with children, can't collect data with primates. I can't travel. I'm stuck at home enjoying my child. And I get a message from this guy, Leo Trottier, who happened to be an ex-graduate student in my department. I met him pushing the broken car of one of my colleagues just a few days earlier. And he sent me a message basically saying, hey, what do you think of this dogs pushing buttons? And I just sent him the same email I sent my colleagues, the same 4 papers saying why we shouldn't be doing this. And then he tells me, look, what do you think of this? And he starts sending me clips of this younger dog that many of you might recognize as Bunny, the talking dog. Back then, it wasn't quite that famous. And I noticed that all these videos are actually unedited. They're not like from TikTok. They're literally like somebody had just sent him these clips. Indeed, he was in direct communication with Alexis Divine, Bunny's human. And now I'm excited. It's like, okay, now there's 2 dogs, but it's still only 2 dogs. And I don't want to get myself into something that I know is going to be problematic. And he tells me, look, I'm starting this company. We're going to sell buttons. And I have heard from several hundred people that they could be interested in being part of a study if we were ever going to conduct one. Would you be interested? I'd never done a citizen science study, a community science study. And I was just unsure, right? It's like, this is going to be a new challenge. But on the other hand, I was also like, hey, there's something happening here. People seem to be interested, indeed, hundreds of people at that time. Now we know it's several thousands. And maybe somebody should be looking at this. Now, fast forward a few years and several people getting involved along the way, especially graduate students helping during the summer through internships and so on. And we've done a little bit of work that I want to tell you about. And hopefully by the end of it, you will see where we're at and where we hope to go next. So here are some of the things that I saw early on. I mean, were not the first couple of clips I was sent, but sort of this will make the point about why I find some of this potentially interesting from a cognitive point of view. So this is a video of Bunny. This one's has subtitles. You might be hard to hear, but hopefully with the subtitles it's going to be okay. And what happens is Bunny is asking Alexis, his human, her human, where is Dad? And Dad was supposed to take her out for a walk.
We'll walk a little bit later. We settle now. Dad went by. Dad went to pick up a pike pole. Dad home soon. Okay, what help? What help, baby?
So what you might notice here, and that was the first thing that kind of impressed me, was that once she was told to settle, Bunny asked about someone who's not in the room, actually somebody who's not in the house. And this is called displacement, referring to people or things that are not present. And most scientists believe that only humans can do this. And already seen this, I'm like, okay, well, maybe that's not quite true. And so the next thing you might notice is that there's some back and forth, right? And so there's something that looks like a little bit of a conversation, which also suggests that maybe the dog might be understanding something about what the human is saying. We know that dogs can understand words, at least some of them can. And you might also notice that the human is not actually touching the buttons, it's just talking. Now, of course, you look at one clip and that means nothing, could totally be, cherry picking. So again, what I'm showing you is just example of ideas and things we're trying to pursue, but I hope it gives you a sense of what is interesting. Now I want to show you another clip. This is also Bunny.
Cat, dog, want? You want the cat that's up there? Where's the cat? Yup. You want the cat?
Cat, dog, want. And then when asked, do you want the cat? Cat, hi, want. So again, the reason I cared about this is because Alexis Divine is a native speaker of English, so does not train Bunny with sentences like this, right? So it might say, Bunny want cat. First of all, would not probably train that at all. Might be like want food or want outside. And so to actually start with the object and then go with the subject and then the verb, of course, is a very unusual sort of syntactic structure. So unusual that actually there appears to be about 3 or 4 languages in the world that use that structure. Otherwise, that is not how humans speak. And so again, it's like, this is just one clip. I can tell you I've seen others like this, but still the idea was, well, maybe it's not just purely imitating what the human is training, right? So maybe there's something here that might be sort of revealing some level of intelligence or some way of communicating that is kind of different from what we might be used to or expecting.
Go walk a little bit.
So what happens is that Bunny becomes a social media star, and some of the participants in the study become quite famous. And so we started getting covered by several news outlets, including New York Times, Washington Post, National Geographic, and so on. And that's good and bad at the same time, because of course, science is very slow. As I said, 86 years to decide on the platypus. And here in a matter of a few months, people are like, so is this real? What's going on? Give us the numbers, give us the results. And of course, we want to be sure that what we're doing is scientifically done, is reliable, is proper. And so what we ended up doing was trying to recruit as many people as possible, and we're still in the process of recruiting, and I'll tell you later why. But we ended up getting thousands of people signing up for the study from 47 different countries, which is quite amazing. It was an amazing moment, especially during the pandemic, because people were looking for a community and were looking for something to be part of and to be engaged in something that was different and new and potentially, groundbreaking. And so we had thousands of people signing up, a lot of media attention, people from any part of the United States. These are the locations where we had participants from, including Alaska, Hawaii, and so on. And people were participating clearly not just using one type of board, because nobody had done this before. Instead of saying this is how you need to do it, I didn't know what would work. Also, I was home with my child. I had no idea what was the perfect way of doing it. And so we're like, well, you do you. You get some buttons, whatever buttons you can get, and then you tell us what you do, how you place them, and so on. And then you sort of fill out some forms, and I'll tell you what we collected. And we go from there. And so, we had, by the way, we also have cats in the study, not just dogs. But you might notice that, there's different brands. Some people put it vertically, some people put it on the floor, just side by side. Others use the tiles that, for example, Fluent Pet used, and so on and so forth. And so one of the things was like, well, what are we interested in? I mean, obviously we're interested in communication and what it reveals about their cognitive abilities. So how they understand the world, how do they experience the world, how this can potentially improve their welfare. The study was originally called They Can Talk, not by me. Indeed, that seems to be already making a claim that I have no idea whether that is actually the case. They're not talking, obviously, but they're communicating. And so the idea was, what can we gather from this type of research? And we were interested in talking pets because we thought it could potentially benefit both the animals and the humans. Again, remember, this is the pandemic, people are home alone, often with their pets. And so for the animals, of course, we might provide them with more control over their environment. They can ask for things and what they want, communicate with humans about pain. I'll show you some clips, reduce animal-human misunderstanding, and potentially provide lifelong cognitive enrichment, and learning might reduce problem behavior. So we've heard from a lot of people that the dog is barking significantly less now that they have the buttons, right? So it's kind of like they can more quickly obtain what they want, and so there's fewer misunderstandings. On the other hand, of course, from a human perspective, you can get a stronger bond with the pet, and so a feeling of companionship that might also help with mental health. Of course, it could have benefits for working dogs, in particular service dogs. It could improve overall our general understanding of pets. And to be honest, you can imagine if you now think that maybe the animals you're dealing with is capable of thoughts and emotions that you didn't know were possible, then maybe we can also change their rights, right? And how people think about them and how they treat them. So some of the questions we had, for example, was, are certain word teaching techniques more successful than others? Do animals with certain personality traits or temperaments communicate about different things in different ways? Do they perform fewer frustration behaviors if they could actually communicate their needs more clearly? And are owners experiencing a general improvement in their relationship with their pets as a consequence of this communication? So these are all kind of overarching themes that we're interested in, and part of why I'm telling you this. Now, just very briefly, because I think many of you are familiar with this, and that was the immediate reason why I said I don't want to do this. I said it several times. There's a long history of trying to train animals with language. The original idea was because it could tell us something about language evolution, and it could also help us understand their cognitive abilities. But a lot of the way in which this was done was by getting apes either into people's homes or keeping them in labs and training them several hours a day, which is obviously very unnatural for wild animals. And to train them initially with sign language, which sort of led to a bunch of different complications. So in 1979, Herbert Terrace writes a paper in Science that almost unilaterally destroys the field and basically says, look, this is just wishful thinking. All these animals are doing are just repeating sequences that they've been trained with for like hundreds of times, and there's nothing really interesting about this. So we wanted to avoid all that, and we obviously were wondering, would it even make sense to do it with dogs? So the first thing we wanted to avoid was overinterpretation, right? So the idea that the human think all this thing is meaningful, all this communication is meaningful, but really the dog is just pushing buttons randomly, or there's nothing really interesting about this. One of the ways to look at that, of course, is to have 24/7 recordings, which nowadays you can do. And if you can have it from several homes, and this can be sent to the cloud and we have access to it, we can watch it, annotate it, and so on, that already helps us sort of detecting the amount of training that has gone into it and whether there was some additional cueing that maybe could not be caught otherwise. Of course, one big challenge in the past was extensive training. I did not want any animal to spend 8 hours a day being trained. It shouldn't be a job to actually learn to use these tools. And so we wanted for this to be something simple that could be learned through occasional training that ideally anybody could do. And so that wasn't quite like the challenge that it had been for great apes. We obviously wanted to avoid sort of low ecological validity, so unnatural settings. And of course, home is not the only setting for dogs. We know that, dogs and cats, but it's definitely a more common environment for dogs and cats, and less of a sort of distance between their natural habitat and what it would be, for example, for great apes. There was also an issue of low numbers, right? So imagine you just have one chimp that you train for the next 20 years. You better be lucky and hope that that one is real smart. You just spent 20 years of your life just working with this one. And what if there was another one that was even better than that, but you never found out because you dedicated your life to this one? Now, that's probably what we do with our children. It doesn't really matter if there's others that are better than them. They are our children and we love them. But of course, if you could have many subjects, many participants in the study, what you could do is something you couldn't do in previous studies, which is you can capture the outliers, right? So we know of outstanding dogs that could learn like hundreds, if not thousands of words. We know that not every dog can do that. But part of what you're interested in is what is possible, right? So the potential and the features that might make some of these animals so smart. It's kind of like, not everybody is good at math. Not everybody can put a rocket on the moon, but humans manage to do that, right? And so it's what could be possible and figuring out what it would take for these skills to kind of emerge and be visible. And of course, when you have a very limited sample size, you have no idea of variability and what features matter or not. So when you have many, you can look at things like, does breed matter? Does the amount of train matter? Does it matter if you start the training when you're young or when you're old? Does temperament matter? So what kind of features could actually play a role in the ability to sort of learn these tools and communicate certain concepts or emotions and so on. And as I said, obviously, a lot of this work previously was done with endangered species, while we wanted to study domesticated animals. The other thing that happened was that in the last 15 years, we have learned a lot about dog and cat cognition, and we know that they're much better than non-human primates at understanding human communication. And cats are as good as dogs, by the way, at understanding communicative signals from humans. So it is kind of obvious that there's something very special about our dogs and cats and how we have sort of developed this kind of strong relationship with them that might warrant looking more into it. So some of the things that we were looking at, and again, I'm going to play you clips. This is not the data I work with. These are just the things that you find online, just so that you get a glimpse of like some of the behaviors that we're kind of trying to track in our data sets. This is an example of Copper asking to go outside at the pool outside.
You want outside? Okay. The pool is drained right now, but I guess I could fill it up again. Okay, pool outside later. Pool outside later. Okay, pool later.
So Copper is now asking again to go somewhere that is not visible, to the pool outside. And what you might notice that now there's a now later kind of communication. We have many of these dogs have been trained with now and later, which is also helpful for many other things. Like, for example, kind of convincing them that they should do something now because later there will be something else coming, kind of a reward promise. Here is another example of a phenomenon that we call productivity, basically combining the kind of symbols you have to communicate a concept you don't quite have a word for. In this case, you see Parker is noticing there's an ambulance stopped outside the house with the siren on, and so you can see what Parker is doing. So it's hard to hear, but you can see Parker selecting buttons, and the two buttons are squeaker, which is what it's part of that word she learned about toys, and car. And so now she asked about squeaker car and goes to the human, looking at the human, kind of like what's going on. The human indeed was not even paying attention, so it's obvious that it's not that the human is trying to cue the dog into pushing that, and it's kind of wondering, what are you trying to talk about? Now, of course, this is anecdotal. You need to have more evidence. We're collecting a lot of it, but we have other dogs that do things like pushing the buttons waterborne to refer to ice, and then when the word ice is provided, they stop using waterborne combinations. I help to talk about whatever medicine they get for their eyes. So they ask for I help. They don't have a word for medicine. Obviously, it's not a concept that is part of their vocabulary. Treat stranger to refer to experimenters. When we would send our research to people's homes, they would come with treats and sort of they would ask about when is the treat stranger coming back. And so again, this would be like they don't have a notion of experimenter, but like there's somebody who came in and so on. Now, again, you might think of it as like this is kind of cute, but just think about the potential value if you have, for example, law enforcement agents and so on, a TSA, whatever. And now you have a dog that notices something and maybe doesn't have quite a word for it, but has the ability to sort of communicate that they saw something, detected something, right? Not to mention, of course, if they can actually more clearly communicate what they detected, that would be much better than just saying, hey, I got something, I smelled something. But if they could tell you exactly what they detected. The other phenomenon that we notice is some of these dogs, especially if there are other pets in the house, would start, the ones who are more proficient, would start communicating for others, which seems kind of weird, but it's not completely crazy. So this is an example of Flambo, this dog, asking for water for Echelon, who does not use the buttons. Espion, sorry.
If I want what? If I want water, I think your water is full. It is not full. The water is empty. Okay. Water? Your water? Oh my god, Flambo.
So you can see that it's the other dog that goes to drink, is not the one who actually asked for the water. And as Ed mentioned, the name of the dog, which is Aspen. Again, you might think about who cares? Well, imagine you have service dogs that can actually ask for things for humans or potentially for other animals. Having some kind of ability to sort of ask for things and communicate in a way that even ones who are not trained in understanding pet communicative behavior would be potentially beneficial. Sometimes they talk about others. They might notice that other animals living in their household seem to be going through something, and they might sort of communicate about this. So this is Bastian communicating about the cat in the house who seems to have problems walking. Just see what Bastian does.
What's going on with Hallie? Yeah, she's having trouble walking.
So Bastian says that it's concerned about sort of the walk that Ellie is going through. Ellie actually ends up passing away just a few days later. She was indeed very sick. But this is also showing something, right? It's like that the dog has noticed something, and that somehow this is something that they can communicate about. This is another thing, maybe one of the most important things that gets me the most excited. You might have seen this clip before. I want to show you another one soon. But basically, one of the things we noticed is that some of them can communicate about their own pain. And obviously communicating about pain, especially if you can do it early on, could then help people treat the animals sooner. So just watch this clip.
Why are you mad? Why mad? Where is your ouch? Where ouch? In your ear? Where, stranger? In your paw? Let me see your paw. Okay, I'm gonna put this down and check. This was the stranger in her paw. She's got a mat between her toes, and that's stuck in it. Now I'm gonna have to figure out how to remove the mat between her toes.
So this was one of the first cases where we saw, okay, so they're saying the animal is in pain. But again, we have many, many other clips of dogs communicating about pain. And so this is, for example, Copper. You saw Copper before. Just see what Copper says.
Ouch! Why? Ouch, ear. Here. Come here. Let me see. Let me see your ear. Come here. Let me see. Let me see. No, I know you found a toy. This one's a little red. Ouch, ear. Let me see this one again. Ouch, ear.
So this one says ouch here, and indeed 1 ear is red, and copper often gets ear infection, so get some medicine. You can see now Parker. Again, the human is not paying attention. Parker goes to the soundboard. Ear, help. Ear. Squeaker and noise. Now, you can see it's not exactly super clear, but it's just saying, this is the body part that hurts and I need some help, okay? And the point here is that potentially you could train animals to communicate about body parts and sort of ask and mention sort of pain and so on. In the interest of time, let me go quickly through what we're doing with this, and then of course you can ask us a question. I know I've been talking already a lot, but I wanted to show you some clips because I think it gives the idea of some of the phenomena we're interested in, maybe better than other things. So what we're doing is we're trying to tackle in every possible way. What we do is we use surveys, questionnaires, automatic data logging, and focus groups to get as much data as possible, every button presses that we can get. We have 24/7 longitudinal continuous video recordings on some of these participants, and for others, we do controlled behavioral experiments where we can go to somebody's home and run the study, or we can just give Zoom instructions, and then while being filmed, they run the study. And of course, the idea is that once we have a good model of how things work, we can do a full training study and see sort of what works best. We collect different sources of data, as I mentioned. We have more than 10,000 intake forms with 180 questions, collecting information about pets and households, which buttons they use, the button presser type, stamped, and so on. We have information about their personality. This is Bunny and Otter. There's another a younger dog in Bunny's household. You might notice that Bunny is praise motivated and it's particularly anxious, while Otter is mainly food motivated, play motivated, is not anxious at all, and is more physically affectionate compared to Bunny. And of course, you can start looking into whether any of these features potentially matters. You can guess, but what I can tell you already is being anxious actually gets the dog to be much more motivated to learn about this and to use it, because you can ask, you can communicate about what's happening and ask for reassurance. A lot of them talk about stranger outside, the Amazon delivery guy, or noise outside when they hear things outside. So there's some kind of attempt to communicate about what's going on. As I said, we have a setup where we can film these animals, and then we use machine learning to detect when the pet is near the button, and then sort of when there's a click going on, so that we can look exactly at those moments where something is going on. And as I said, we do experiments. Very quickly, there's a big range of sort of participant, huge individual differences. The median number of buttons is 9, but some of them have more than 100, okay? Many of them have actually more than 40 or 50, and it matters for me because we know that children start using 2-word sentences when they have a vocabulary of 50 words. And so again, when you have several dogs that have more than 40, 50 buttons, then you have the potential to see some of the things that you saw in some of these dogs, right? So combining more than one button at the same time. But as you can see, there's also huge variability in terms of, you know, how many buttons they have, and whether, and all these are all buttons that they use, of course. But you can see that some older dogs are still pretty good at learning and using buttons. We do have cats in the study as well. By the way, these are only the ones we connect. We have many more than this, of course. And again, quite a bit of variability, but we also have several cats that have more than 40, 50 buttons, which again is quite impressive. The median is a little higher, it's 12 buttons for the cats. But the message is not that you need to have 100 buttons to be able to communicate anything. In theory, just having 3-4 buttons can be helpful, right? It's like if you can say you want to go outside, you want water or food, you want to, you know, cuddle or play, or just communicating pain and body parts, that could be huge. We look at things like, you know, what do they do if they push the button and the owner is distracted? Well, they repeat the button presses or press the same button several times, or they bark to call for the attention. So very reasonable. Mostly they request for things, which is exactly what we expected. They could inform or alert, like, as I said, stranger outside. Some of them seem to be doing things like describing what they see or what's happening, like mom cooking. So they're not informing the owner that it's cooking. Obviously, they know, but that's something that young children do too. And of course, they do some of these things, as I said, that I mentioned, like speaking for others or speaking to another as well. Then there's a bunch of, we don't know really what's going on. Critically, they're not pushing those buttons randomly. So you can see that they are dogs, which means the buttons they press the most are treat, outside, food, play, potty, water, help, cuddle, outdoor locations. And some of the things they don't press very often are things like happy, concerned, mad, later, or I love you, which is something that many humans are training, but is not necessarily the most salient thing for them to actually press. So again, they're not pushing these buttons randomly, they're selective in what they communicate about. And we can also look at what time of the day those buttons are pressed so they can make more sense, right? It's like, imagine you push for food only in the middle of the night, and then during the day you never ask for it, or outdoor only like in the middle of the night and never during the day. That would be telling us that maybe you have no idea what this button is actually about. We can look at what words go with each other. This is just one dog, but for example, this dog have some buttons like want that connects with want water, want food, want outside. And so you can start seeing that they can start communicating two-word concepts and connect things. And then, of course, some buttons tend to be produced close to each other, and like walk potty, walk upstairs, walk hike, walk outside, and so on and so forth. By the way, this dog has platypus among the buttons is one of their toys, and that's why I wanted to use this one. We can look at their learning. Some dogs, the majority of them, of course, the human kind of models the use of the buttons. We can talk about how they do it. And then after a while, so the blue is the human pushing the buttons, and the red is when the dog presses the button. These are the concepts. But then some of them do it differently. Like they explore the soundboard, so they push the button first and look at what happens next. And they do it a few times, and that's sort of how they try to learn, by being more proactive and sort of interacting with the device. And the other thing I want to show you cannot read the words here on purpose, but the idea, this is 3 different dogs. You have actually seen all 3 in the videos today. And what I want to show is like we can see like day by day how many buttons they press, and you can see there's huge variability. Some days they're not very chatty, some days they have a lot to say. But you can also see that they're very different in what they care about. So for example, this one asks a lot about treats. This one talks a lot about potty and poop and really communicates a lot about that. And this other one talks a lot about going outside and different places they want to go to. So again, different personalities, different needs, different requests that I think can be sort of interesting for us to look at. Now, I don't have time to show you these videos. Maybe I'll show you just one later. But basically we do, as I said, behavior experiments to see when you push the button, for example, outside, do you actually go to the door outside? And when we push the button, play, do you actually go looking for a toy? So do they understand the meaning of these buttons? And so these are papers that we're now submitting. But I want to show you an example from this dog. This is called the impossible tasks. They're trying to open a box. In the beginning, they can open it. And then at some point, we lock the lids. And so you cannot actually retrieve the treat that is inside. And so we want to see whether the dog can communicate about needing help, in this case, by pushing the button, help. And so here's the trial. The owner has been instructed not to react. Parker is trying again. And pushes the button, help, look, look. Which again, for me is important because if you could do this, you could actually ask for help, even if the human is not paying attention to you, right? Which in different households, in different situations, maybe in shelters, could be actually beneficial if somebody could actually call for help. So to get to the end of this, The New York Times recently published an article saying that while dogs are really good at reading human emotions, experts, and especially the average person, is not particularly good at understanding dog communicative behavior. Indeed, hundreds of thousands of people end up in the ER getting bit, including people working in the White House. Apparently, Commander keeps biting people every other day. So there's a lot of not understanding what the dog is trying to communicate. And while, of course, all of you are experts, we know that out there's a lot of people that are not experts. So one of the things that I'm hoping is that maybe this can help making certain things a little more apparent and more clearly visible for ones who are not necessarily highly trained on understanding their pets. But it's not to replace the dog behavior, it's to kind of supplement, right? It's like learning a second language. It's not, they're still dogs. They go out, they do their things. But once in a while, they might use these buttons. And scientifically, you know, one of my mentors published a paper in 2009 in Science saying that dogs seem to have at least the cognitive abilities of a human infant, which back then seemed quite impressive. And my suggestion is that it's actually much better than that, at the very least of a toddler, if not more than that. And again, imagine what it would do to animal rights and our belief about how you should treat and interact with a pet if you actually could sort of get to that. And so the last thing, how can you help? Well, if you want, please sign up to the study. We're always looking for participants. If you're interested in supporting this research, or you have friends or people who might be interested in supporting it, please check out our lab website. And I know that a lot of you have run shelters. I think it would be fantastic to try to train some shelter dogs. Obviously, not all of them, it would be impossible, but also see whether once you provide them with a few buttons that would potentially help them even once they get adopted, maybe making it easier for the people taking them in to understand the basic needs, and maybe making that communication and bond kind of get kickstarted a little faster and a little more efficiently. And on this note, sorry for going a little long. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Feel free to reach out to me and ask me any questions.
This was a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. I know I wish we had more time. There were some really good questions. No, you're good. I'm glad we started a little early. I know it's hard to fit it all in, but everybody is really intrigued by this. There was a lot of great questions and in the chat, so we'll have to get that to you and follow back up. But yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I promise
I will respond. I've been told I can get access to the questions. I will respond, and please feel free to reach out. Look us up, send me a message. I would love to hear your thoughts and see if there's ways to collaborate or help in any way.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Shannon, I think we've recorded a lot of the questions, right? So we'll probably just move to, we have a pet forum, Dr. Rosano, so we'll communicate after and get your answers on there. But truly, thank you so much. This was incredible presentation. Really mind-blowing.
So let me give you my email in the chat just so that you can write me directly. You can also go to the lab website, and if you email to the contact that forwarded to me, but if you just want to write me directly with questions or feedback, or even just tell me that this is complete nonsense, I take any criticism. Skepticism is the meat of science. So it's the key part of like how we get to do it. So I appreciate it. But I also hope you can see that all comes out of love and care for this animals, and not trying to sort of exploit them in any possible way. It's the opposite, and I hope it's coming across.
Absolutely, it's definitely come across. Thank you. Shannon, did you want to add something?
Thank you so much, and I'm sure you'll have lots of questions and responses in the chat.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to them, and sorry for taking longer. I kept adding clips. I was just like, I think you should see some of this. I mean, maybe some of you already know it, but others was like, I would like to tell you why some of these things are interesting for me. And hopefully, anyway, sorry about that. I always go a little long. No. I get too excited. Sorry about that, but I hope it's okay.
No apologies. I think we all wanted it to go longer. So we'll definitely keep the conversation going at the forum. And yeah, the clips were incredible. So thank you. we wanted more, I'm sure. Thanks. Everyone have a great rest of the week. Thanks for joining us. Please share the recording of this once it's available, and we'll see you on Maddie's Pet Forum. Thanks all. Have a good week.
Bye.